Hi everyone, I'm back, and today instead of doing a movie I'm going to talk about the latest book that I've read, and that book is Blackwing by Ed McDonald. And the interesting thing about this is that it's a debut novel, so it's the first book by Ed McDonald, and it's called Blackwing, but it's also subtitled The Raven's Mark Book 1. And I have a very weird relationship with fantasy novels. It's probably, in a lot of ways, my most favorite genre. I read Lord of the Rings when I was 13, and I've played D&D all my life, computer games, and I just absolutely love when I'm completely taken away by a fantasy novel. And yet no genre disappoints me more than fantasy. I don't know how many times I've picked up a book and started reading it and get 30 pages in and find that the author can't write or just doesn't have a clue about how to put together the world with the mechanics of what he or she is trying to do, the characters. It fails more times than not. So when I see a bit of hype around a new novel, especially a debut novel, I really am hopeful that this might be the start of, especially if it was, a great series like, and the most famous one is Game of Thrones, where a friend just said, oh, this George R.R. Martin, he is a really good writer. When he does fantasy novels, you should read him. And I did and fell in love. So, Blackwing. What I like about this is that it is completely what they call grimdark. Bad things happen to a lot of people, but it's actually more in a lot of ways like a detective noir novel. So still, by definition, noir, you're looking at probably the worst side of humanity, but there's always that silver lining, and that's what makes any moments of celebration or victory even sweeter. So what I like about this especially is that it is set in a completely new fantasy world, and some of the mechanics and some of the descriptions and the creatures which live in it were completely new and quite novel, and I really enjoyed that. So without boring you with every single part of the world, I'll just give you the 30-second précis, which is, it's kind of like a fantasy world in terms of, medieval kind of technology, and yet there's this huge space in the middle of the world which is called the Misery. And the Misery was established by the Nameless, which are these kind of immortal kind of wizards, as basically like dropping a nuclear bomb, but using magic to stop the endless, I think they're called the Endless Kings, the Deep Kings, that's right, the Deep Kings from extending their empire, and they're like a Borg-like thing. They can create undead out of anyone they beat, and they've just been relentlessly trying to expand their empire, and the Nameless are always trying to stop them, and humanity are kind of in the middle. And what I like about it is, so when you go into this world, you really have no idea how it's operating, and it's almost a little bit Lovecraftian in that the magic itself has rent reality apart. And so there's creatures which are in the Misery which people might never see. They see once and never again, and then there are some which are by design used by the Deep Kings against humanity. And so into this world we meet our leading protagonist, and he is Rhyhort Galharrow, which is a classic kind of grimdark name. You probably know more about the character just from that name than anything else. And the thing about having a name like that, you kind of got to live up to that name. And he's got that classic noir hero thing, which is he's a very good fighter, and he's got some touches of nobleness, but he's an alcoholic, and his main, if you had to sum him up, he's tenacious. And that really is always what you're looking for in a hero, especially in kind of a grimdark world, because often at the end of the day, it's not really the most skilled or smartest person. It's normally the person who just doesn't give up. And Rhyhort is definitely that guy. Now, he's got some great little characters, Nen and Tanolta, and they work within his kind of band of mercenaries, and he's always doing bits and bob for the, you know, the powers that be. And then we have this scenario which starts to unravel, conspiracy about the use of this engine called Neor's engine, and that's the one thing which is keeping the enemy at bay. And Galharrow stumbles upon a conspiracy of some sort about the engine, and we're into it. So that's all I wanted to say about it. That's enough setup. What I love about this is McDonald can really write. Like the first couple of chapters, when I open a book and I can see that someone can really put a sentence together, especially describing fantasy concepts, which are, I think, hard to do sometimes because you're imagining at the same time as plotting, introducing your characters. Got to do a lot of exposition so that people can keep with you, and he does that with aplomb. And I would say the first 4 or 5 chapters are just beautiful. He's probably polished them within an inch of their life. It's very good. Problem is, he's a debut novelist, and the thing that debut novelists always struggle with is pacing. They're not quite sure where they've got to use their editing, and this does have that problem where in the middle of the book, as it sets up the end of its second act, it has some problems with getting across all the exposition. You're introduced to a lot of new people, and the conspiracies are starting to come out, and that is very hard work to do, and he fumbles the ball a little bit, so much that you do feel like you hit a bit of a wall at that point. You push through, and then he gets to the other side of the hill, and then it rattles home, and he knows exactly what he wants to do with his characters and how he's going to end the book. So it really comes home, and it's got some mighty moments and, you know, all revelations and everything, and it's really, really good. So I enjoyed it immensely. It's not often that I say this, that when he brings out the next one, I will be reading it, because it's been probably a while that I've picked up a book that I'm going to read the series. But this guy can write. He will only get better. Now he's got this one under his belt. I think his next book will be a little bit more polished. He's established his world. I really recommend that if you are at all into fantasy, and especially grimdark, if you read like Mark Lawrence or any of those, Joe Abercrombie, this is probably a guy that you'd want to add to your list. Now, before I finish off, as I do, I'll just tell you about the next book that I'm reading, and I've just started it, and very different, couldn't be more different. So it's George Saunders' Lincoln in the Bardo. And anyone who reads fiction knows George Saunders. George Saunders has been talked about as the writer's writer for over a decade, 2 decades. And this book has come out, and he hasn't written many novels. He normally writes short stories collections, and he has written Lincoln in the Bardo. Now, the Bardo, I'll just explain quickly. The Bardo is like a Buddhist term, and the easiest way to think of it would be like limbo in the old Christian mythology, which is when a soul is caught between death and where it needs to go. And it's the famous story of Abraham Lincoln and his son William, who is at 11 years of old. This is at the peak of the Civil War. With everything that he is dealing with, he loses his son, and it just breaks him. And famously, it's been documented the sorrow he had at that time. So this won million awards, but the reason why I got to my list is I always read the winner of the Man Booker, and so I've started this, and I'll talk about this next time. Okay, so if you want to hear more from me, obviously, just subscribe. You just click that bell, and then you always know when I'm putting out new stuff. Plenty of stuff on movies and TV, and I'm also on Twitter at Guru Eden. So I'll talk to you then. Okay, bye.